Well, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but
You're the expert if you know more than the next person.
Jerry, Mark Winder here.
hi, Mark.
Hello, Mark.
Great to be with all of you. I would appreciate your sending me whatever you print so we put it on the website of the Caucus of American Jews, the website.
Okay, we've
But
got that.
we like to claim credit for all the fantastic work that you're doing.
I can do that. It was a letter to the editor in the paper that appeared just this morning of all days.
Great.
Hello, Mark Weiner. It's Ellen Klein saying hi to
Ellen.
you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
We're doing a series of articles which are being published in the Jewish Journal, which is the publication which goes to all 600,000 Jews in Southeast Florida, given out in supermarkets, synagogues, and enclosed in the Sun Sentinel. And we have an article a week that we're putting in, whether they publish it or not. So far, they're publishing it, and a rotation of us. I will. Those will all be posted on the caucus website. And you're welcome to plagiarize anything and everything that we write.
All right, we're going to wait a few minutes to get started. We already have 126 people. We'll probably go up to about 150. I'm going to give it a few more minutes. We're also going to be needing to check, like, who is 305 409 4431. Who is that?
That's me. That's Rep. Joe Geller.
Oh, good. Great. Hi. Welcome.
I will be getting on in Zoom in a little bit, but in the meantime, I thought I'd call in because I'm not quite ready to Zoom.
Thank you so much. We just want to know who everybody is.
That's interesting.
Joe Geller is the chair of the Jewish caucus in the Florida state legislature, for your information, and is a longtime champion of Jewish issues in the whole state of Florida, especially Southeast Florida, but the whole state.
And an early and great supporter of the next president of the United States, I must say. How are you, Joe?
Doing great. Happy to be with everybody today.
Good.
I think he's gonna Biden shirt.
Hey, good morning.
Check your email, please.
Hi,
Check your
Jerry.
email, please.
Yes.
Hi, it's Amy Weinberger. How are you?
Good. I'm good. How are you doing? Welcome.
Good. Thank you. Hi. I wanted to just mention I've been struggling with writing the education position for our Sarasota caucus because, and I haven't reached out to anyone and I should have, and so you can scold me for that. But because of COVID-19 and because of all the racism and things that are going on, education has its own racism embedded in its institution as well. It's not without. And so I have gone to the Joe Biden website to understand their platform, you know, as a democratic community, and I have that in mind. But I just, if anyone is out there who is also an educator in educational policy and would like to help me, I would take someone's help, please.
Just put that in the chat. Everybody look at the bottom of your screen and you'll see a box that says chat. And you can click on that and you can send messages to everybody, or you can pick an individual that you want to send a message to.
Thank you.
Shit. I can't do that if I'm on.
Jerry?
Jerry?
Yes.
There are some other people on with, you can't recognize their names, like there's somebody has Evie's iPhone 972. And somebody said, who's identified as Lotus, if they can just go to the right-hand corner and type in their full name.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Let me,
That's this one.
okay, Lou, you are my co-host, and Lou is going to be checking people and helping me in that regard because it's so difficult to do a presentation and talk and keep track of everybody all at the same time. It's very difficult.
So you're checking to make sure that everybody's a member of the caucus or a Democrat at least?
Or just that we have a name and that they're identified. Everybody's registered. That's one of the reasons why we do Zoom first, because Zoom requires certain information, so it allows people to register, and then we have that information, and then they're sent the Zoom link. Okay.
Okay. Jerry, quick question.
Yes?
This is Eddie. I'm in Boca Raton. Where can we get a hold of your letter to the editor?
I will have to send that to people.
No. Go to heraldtribune.com, go to
Okay.
letters to the editor, and you'll find it.
heraldtribune.com. Very good. Thank you.
All right, sure. Okay.
We can look at our paper.
Hi, Maury. Welcome.
Hi, Jerry.
Okay. I think we should get started. And I'm going to give you some instructions about what to do. But let me say first to everybody, Shalom, Democrats.
Shalom.
Shalom, Democrats. Okay.
Shalom.
Now, I'm going to mute everyone, and I will unmute people when they're called on to speak. Okay. If you want to chat with someone, if you want to send a message to anyone, you can do that by going to the chat box and putting in a message that can go to everyone or to specific people. I'm glad you brought your bagels. I see people drinking coffee. This is great. This is called our Nosh and Knowledge series that we're starting, and we welcome all of you. First thing, before we go on, I'm going to tell you, if you have a question for our speaker, please just put your question into the chat box. That's how we will keep track of questions. And then we'll call on people in the order in which they put the question in the chat box. Okay? It's impossible for me to see everyone who raises their hand because we've got now 142 people, 143 people now on this call. So it's very difficult to see. I can't see everybody. So please put your questions in the chat box and we will go back over all of them. I also want to call your attention to, I put in the chat box our website, srqjewishdems.org, sorry, srqjewishdems.org. And we have a tremendous amount of information there about our caucus. There are membership forms there that you can download, you can fill out and send in. We'd love to have, I know there are many, many people on this call this morning that are not members. We just started in February. We're a new organization. We had a tremendous response from our community, clearly filling a need in our community for a venue for Democratic Jews to speak and meet and be able to criticize Trump all we want. And that's important. And we are trying to do a lot of different things. We've got a great board of directors and people who are chairing committees who are doing fantastic work. But you can find a lot on our website. And so I encourage you to go there. Again, it's srqjewishdems.org. Okay, I had also, I had to switch from my computer to a laptop, and I don't have some of the things that I wanted to show on the screen, one thing I was going to show on the screen is a picture of Donald Trump holding up a bagel in front of a synagogue, just like he did the Bible in front of the church. This is a bagel, only it looks like the bagel has ham and cheese on it. But the reason I was going to do that is because today is Donald Trump's birthday. And we all want to wish him a happy last birthday in the White House. Okay? Happy last birthday, Donald Trump in the White House. Okay. I know that we have a quorum. So I'm just going to ask if all of the members only, can vote. I just need approval of the minutes from our last meeting. And if someone would so move, we'll put it in the chat box and we will recognize them. And then what I'll do is when we vote, I'll ask only for people who say no, that they're opposed, to raise their hands or, okay. So Marianne D'aquino Turl, so moved. I need a second.
I so move.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And so all those who are opposed, please raise their hands. That was Wendy Wicks that seconded. Okay, so the minutes are passed and approved. I want to just tell you a couple other things. Please, if you're about to do something that might be embarrassing, please turn off your video so we don't see it. and I'm going to keep everybody muted until they're recognized. Okay. I want to say a few other things before we get going here. First, let me congratulate Lou Grossman and Barbara Katz, who are members of our caucus, who were both elected to be delegates to the Democratic National Convention. And in fact, not only were they elected, they were the two top vote getters in the state of Florida, which is just terrific. We really applaud them. And we know they will be representing us well. We wish them the best. Okay. I want to recognize a couple other people that are here. Is Joanne DeVries here? I don't know if she's joined in. I don't think so. Okay. Well, I want to recognize Rabbi Mark Weiner, who is the president of the Florida State Democratic Jewish Caucus. Rabbi Weiner, would you like to say a few words? And let me see if I can unmute you, if I can find you.
Okay, I just unmuted myself.
Very good. Okay.
Right. I am so honored to be a part of this caucus meeting and to have been with you from your very first meeting. I gladly joined then, and I hope you charge me dues every year because I get unlimited pleasure out of being associated with you. You are the model of what we would like to have in every city in the state of Florida, in every county. We do not. You are alone in the whole state of Florida as a local caucus, which really functions so well. And we just want you to spread your disease to everybody else because we love you. You're just
what a disease.
Fantastic. Now, we as Jews and we as Americans are involved in the profound civil war that has afflicted American society from the beginning of American history between the absolutely worst elements in our society and the best elements in our society. As Jews, we are called upon to be a Mamlechet Kohanim V'Goy Kadosh, a kingdom of priests and a holy people. And from the beginning of American history, we've been involved on the side of the angels. And I'm not saying perfectly, I'm not saying every Jew, but on the whole, and certainly the last 100 years, most of all in the civil rights movement, and most of us throughout our lives have been so involved. That is who we are. And when we're involved in this process, standing up for what we think America should be, we're executing our vision as proud Jews as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'm so glad you joined us. I'd also like to recognize Representative Joe Geller, who is a representative in the Florida legislature and is chair of the Jewish caucus in the legislature. Joe, would you like to say a few words? I don't know that he's on, and we may come back to him. Anyway, we're really pleased to have Joe.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead,
Can you hear
Joe.
me? Okay.
Go.
Yes, hi. Thank you for recognizing me. I had a little issue with the unmute there. I want to echo Rabbi Weiner's words and just very briefly thank everybody for getting on this call. I'm not the first one, and I'm not going to be the last one to say that although every election we seem to say this is the most important election of our lifetimes, it's truer now than it's ever been when we've said those words. I mean, the assault on our very system of democracy that this administration and this president have engaged in is shocking. And literally, we have to worry about our democracy. I can say, since we're all members, that, and I try to avoid incendiary rhetoric publicly, but since this is not public, this is the kind of tactics that the Nazis used to seize power. Violence, fear, and physical intimidation of opponents. That's how Hitler took the Reichstag. And we have to recognize that this attempt at militarization of our society, of authoritarianism, is a threat to the very basic rule of law that we have in this country. This president literally asserts in court that he is above the law, that he is, a supreme authority, is not subject to checks and balances. He tells the courts that they don't have authority, only the legislative branch, and he tells the legislative branch they have no authority, only the courts. At the end of the day, this is a struggle for survival, and I have to say that it's heartening to see so many of our senior military leaders, retired 4-stars, left, right, and center, admirals and Army and Air Force, Marine generals, standing up for the rule of law and standing against militarization of our society. So I'm very happy to be with you today, but this is truly a titanic struggle, and none of us can stand on the sidelines. Thank you, Jerry, and thank you.
Joe, thank you very much. I think we have, is Ted Deutsch on the call? Ted Deutsch, you'd have to unmute yourself. I thought I saw him come on. He's a U.S. congressman. Okay, he may not be able to talk right now. Also, I want to introduce, is Ben Martell there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Good, great. Ben is a representative of the Biden campaign. Ben, welcome. Why don't you say a few words?
Thank you.
Just keep it short.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Jerry and Lou, for organizing this, and great to see some familiar faces on here and to meet everyone else. My name's Ben. I work for the Biden campaign. I joined about a year ago, and I work in the organizing department as well as our Jewish outreach team. So I want to just walk you through 3 quick resources to give you a quick update on what we're doing for the Jewish community. So the first is we released a plan, a comprehensive plan on our website, Joe Biden in the Jewish Community, a record and a plan of friendship, support, and action. So that's got all of our official policy positions on matters pertaining to anti-Semitism, Israel, Jewish values. And so I'm going to put that in the chat box. The second thing we have, I'm going to put in the chat box as well, is the link to our website for organizing. There's a lot of different actions we can take right now, phone calling, text messaging, and they're all super important. And the final thing that I want to do, which I'm really excited for, is I'm going to put in the chat box a link to sign up for our listserv. I've created a Florida Jewish listserv that we use to advertise events. There's no spam on it. I send out updates when we're doing exciting things. And we're going to be doing a Florida leadership training for Jewish leaders in Florida very soon, likely with Ambassador Dan Shapiro from Israel, who is Obama's ambassador to Israel. And so I'm going to put that form in the chat box as well, and please do sign up. And then thank you so much. And Jerry and Lou will be a point of contact. So if you'd like to join or get updates from us or have any questions for me, please do reach out to them and they'll make sure that we're connected. So thank you all for welcoming me today.
Thank you, Ben. And of course, we wish you the very best. I forgot to tell everyone, of course, I'm Jerry Fleischer. I'm president of the Jewish Caucus, and I'm vice chair of the Sarasota County Democratic Party. I'm also a retired psychologist, and when I retired and came to Sarasota, I started to volunteer for Jewish Family and Children's Services, where I take intake calls. This is going along with what Joe Geller said. When I started right after Trump became president, we got a couple of calls from people in the community who were Holocaust survivors, who had led a very stable, mostly normal life for quite a few years, who had become quite upset and disturbed because Trump reminded them so much of Hitler. And these were people that I had to then refer for counseling. And it was really striking to hear that from people. I want to go on and recognize a couple other people here. Drake Buckman, who is a candidate for the Florida legislature in District 72, is with us. Drake spoke with us in April and was a tremendous presenter. It was great. And I also want to recognize Dan Claremont, who is a candidate for Sarasota City Council, who's also on with us today. I want to tell you about some upcoming programs, and then we're going to get into our main focus today. On July 12th, and this is part of a series that we're having on Sundays at noon, Sundays at 11, called Nosh and Knowledge. It's on July 12th. Dale Anderson, MD, will do a webinar on voter suppression and democracy degradation. And we will, of course, be sending out information and invitations to everyone about this. On August 9th, we have Professor Mark Paul, PhD of New College. He is a political economist working in the area of environment and inequality. And on September 13th, we have Representative Joe Geller, who will be joining us to talk about why Joe is good for the Jews, okay? Also on Thursday, July 2nd, on Zoom, these are all on Zoom, at 5 p.m., we're having a political party happy hour, just for members, where we can talk about past campaigns, where bring memorabilia from past campaigns, where Red, White, and Blue do show and tell and socialize. That's on Thursday, July 2nd at 5 p.m. Again, we'll be sending out notices about all of this. Okay, now moving on to our presentation this morning. You know, there is one big divisive issue among Jewish voters that we've heard over and over and over again, and that is Trump is good for Israel. Trump is good for Israel. So I am willing essentially to overlook his lies, immorality, raging narcissism, divisiveness, fanning bigotry and hate, disastrous foreign policy, loss of respect for America in the world, utter incompetence as a leader during current crises, And they're willing to do that because he supports Israel. Okay, well, that's what we're going to find out about this morning. Just how much is that really true? It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Dr. Andre Krauss, who is well known in the Sarasota community and has made presentations at a number of congregations, regular lecturer at Ollie at Ringling College, and at the Lifelong Learning at USF, just to name a few people. He's a published art historian and media psychologist. He has doctorates in history of art from the University of Gothenburg, Sweden, and social psychology from the University of Bucharest, Romania. Dr. Krauss made Aliyah with his family to Israel as a teen, where he completed school in Israel, served in the Israel Defense Force, the IDF, and lived there for many years. He is most known for his focus on the Holocaust, Hitler, the Jewish resistance, anti-Semitism, and anti-Zionism. But he also speaks on cinema and art topics. So it's my great pleasure to introduce him this morning to you. Again, he's going to make a presentation. Please write questions in the chat box, and then we'll have a discussion after. Okay, Andre.
Hi.
Great.
Greetings to all.
Jerry, you have to, you're disabling the screen share.
Okay, got it. I got it now. Okay, you're good. Go ahead.
Can everybody see this?
Yeah, but put it on present.
Yeah.
Everybody's seeing it.
So Jerry had aptly introduced the topic. Let me see if I can move. So the question is, why are Jewish American Democrats urged to abandon their traditional loyalty to the Democratic Party and vote Republican in November 2020? As Jerry had mentioned, the people who are of that persuasion, they are willing to overlook all of President Trump's shortcomings as a leader of the free world. And I also think that it's rather short-sighted to vote for the leadership of the free world, probably the most important and powerful position in politics today, by focusing on one criteria only. Is he good or not for Israel? However, we have to discuss that today. This is the topic, because we want to see how the talking points of the people who urge such action stand up to scrutiny. I have had many discussions with friends and acquaintances about this topic. I'm actually pleasantly surprised to see one of them in the audience today. Hi, Eddie from Boca Raton. We've discussed this with Eddie on social gatherings and other opportunities. And I also received, through other people, Eddie's many postings about this issue. Inadvertently, they helped me, so thank you, Eddie.
Guilty as charged. Thank you.
Okay. In addition to people that I know and I've discussed with, I also became aware of two organizations that promote these ideas, Jake Zit and Jake Sedus. We will look at them in the course of the presentation. But here are their most central talking points. Trump is Israel's best friend because he's a champion of the Jewish people who combats anti-Semitism, because he canceled the nuclear deal with Iran, because he moved the embassy to Jerusalem, because he supports annexation of the Golan Heights and probably the West Bank, because he suspended aid to the Palestinian Authority, and because to those people, it seems that the Democrats have abandoned Israel and condone anti-Semitism. So who are they and what are they saying? As I mentioned, Jake-Sid and Jake-Sodus, who now became the Exodus movement. When they were Jake-Sodus, they were ridiculed a little bit for the redundancy since Exodus is a Jewish Exodus. So now it became the Exodus movement. Both Jake-Sid and Jake-Sodus present themselves as new movements, when in fact, most of them are veteran Trump supporters from the 2016 campaign. This is one of the problems that both these organizations, like most things associated with Donald Trump, are fraught with falsehoods and spins. And essentially, they're just a giant PR campaign to try and convince Jewish Americans and Israeli Americans that Trump is their best candidate in the White House. So Jake-Sid is a Florida-based nonprofit organization, pro-Trump activists calling for Jewish exit from the Democratic Party. Among their leaders, Michelle Lubin-Teres, Sigi Flicker, Sofia Manolescu, Cantor Sagi Goldenholtz, and Alexander Levine. We'll take a closer look to some of them. For example, Michelle Lubin-Teres. And as you can see from her description in their website, she wants to educate Jews on the drastic and alarming changes happening in the Democratic Party, but in fact, she is a veteran Trump supporter from way before. Sigi Flicker, their spokesperson, she is an Israeli-born daughter of a Holocaust survivor. So we shall see that these people flaunt their connections to the Holocaust in order to appropriate the entire Holocaust narrative to their agenda. When I read that that Sigi Flicker is actually a TV star, and she is, as you see here, called an outspoken and fearless star standing for those who don't have a voice. Initially, I thought that she stands for probably the real husbands of New Jersey who don't have a voice. But I later learned by looking at their signs during their rallies that in fact they mean the 6 million Jewish victims of the Holocaust. As you see here, it says, we speak for the 6 million Jews who had no voice. Well, who's to guarantee that all 6 million would have voted for Trump? I don't know. You see here again, did we not learn anything from 1938, which I suppose it means Kristallnacht, or remember the Holocaust, or never again. So they are appropriating the entire Holocaust and Zionist narrative to serve their agenda. Sofia Manolescu I found interesting because she's born, like myself, in Romania. And she claims that her father survived 7 years in a Siberian gulag for attempting to resist the Bolsheviks. Well, she's not old enough for that, nor is her father, because Ceausescu not only didn't send anybody to Siberia, he had his own prisons, but he was at odds with the Soviet leadership. So here's another little slogan that is full of lies. She also claims that her firsthand knowledge of how the rise of anti-Semitism and socialism have grave consequences. She is determined to educate Americans about the imminent danger of remaining complacent and silent when Western civilizations comes under attack. Now, this is a huge, huge statement. And when I read about this as an academic, I became curious. So I Googled this lady and found that her only degrees were in physical training and bicycle training. So I'm not sure how she wants to educate Americans about the imminent danger of Western civilization coming under attack. Cantor Sagi Goldenholz, also an Israeli born, and as you see, he's the son of Holocaust survivors. So he also shows his Holocaust connection in order to promote the agenda of Jexit. He's a very interesting person with a lovely voice. And I just want to take a moment to read from some of his reasons for leaving the Democratic Party. I'm not sure, of course, I can find my notes now, but essentially he's using very interesting terminology. He gave this speech on the eve of Passover. So he said that now when we ask, how is this president different from all other presidents? Or he said that our people were slaves. So he's using the traditional Passover story to adapt it to Jexit. He said, our ancestors were slaves, meaning his parents and grandparents who were voting Democrat traditionally. And he said, and now we will no longer be slaves to the Democratic Party. And he ends his speech with, let my people go, urging the Democratic Party to let the Jews who have now recognized that their place is with Trump, let my people go. So it's very interesting the way they frame their ideology. One other thing that I remarked in Cantor Sagi Goldenholz's speech is that he's throwing out these talking points that I showed in the beginning, and he doesn't expect his audience to fact check or to document themselves a little further, but he's just throwing them out and expects these sound bites to be swallowed and adopted instantly without any critical revision. So, for example, one of his talking points, among the others that I listed before, moving the embassy and canceling the Iran deal and so on, was that President Trump had stopped the sale of advanced fighter aircraft, F-35 aircraft, to Turkey. And he lists that as a special merit of President Trump because this move had benefited Israel's security. In fact, the United States had canceled the sale of these advanced aircraft through a National Defense Authorization Act in the Congress. The Congress canceled the sale of these aircraft to Turkey, actually much to the chagrin of President Trump, who wanted the sale to go ahead, not only because he loves to do big business and enrich the US Treasury, but because, as we shall see, he had special interests in Turkey. So it's the Department of Defense which eventually canceled the sale. And it was canceled because Turkey had previously purchased a Soviet anti-air missile system, the S-400, and the Department of Defense decided that it's incompatible for a country to have armaments from from Russia rather, and NATO at the same time, given the security risk involved. So Trump, after comforting Erdogan and saying that probably they'll work something out, was motivated mostly by the fact that he owns the Trump Towers in Istanbul since 2012, and an interview given to Bannon before he became Trump's election campaign manager. He gave an interview at Breitbart saying that he has interest, financial interest in Turkey, and he's not sure that he'll be able to deal with that in an objective manner. This is only one example where Jakes and other propagandists who urge Jews to vote for Trump just make these statements which are outright lies, in fact. Regarding the military aid to Israel, Trump is lauded as the best friend of Israel, the best friend Israel has ever had in the White House. But in fact, it was President Obama who signed the largest military aid for Israel, larger than all his predecessors. The most recent is President Bush. It was a 10-year agreement valued at $38 billion. At the bottom of my slides, you always find the sources for this information. So where are they saying it? They're saying it at website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, rallies, fundraising events. But they're not really a grassroots movement. Derisively in the press, they were called a clumsy astroturf movement. So now let's look at Jakesodus. It was started by a political campaign advisor to Donald Trump, a Republican lobbyist. So it wasn't a disenchanted Democrat as they like to present themselves. They encourage American Jews to leave the Democratic Party. These are from their websites. They claim to be galvanized particularly by the controversial remarks made by the squad. But in fact, they were registered long before the squad was elected in 2018. So here's another falsehood. It's an organization, according to their website, dedicated to supporting the lives and values of proud Jewish Americans, which rejects the anti-Americanism, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism sweeping our country right now. And they are committed to educating and assisting those who have yet to make their exodus. In other words, there are only two kinds of Jewish Americans, the ones who left the Democratic Party and the ones who are about to leave. The new leader and spokesperson of the Exodus movement is Elizabeth Pipko, a young this part of the slide is always covered, so I don't know. Anyway, she's a young swimsuit model, formerly a figure skater, but she as well is not a former Democrat who got disenchanted with the Democratic Party as she presents herself, but she was actually a Trump staffer in 2016. She met her husband, you see him here, this is their photo with Trump and Melania. She met her husband campaigning for Trump, and actually their wedding was arranged at Mar-a-Lago. But she presents herself as a disenchanted Democrat. She says that in interviews that she kept, you can find all this on YouTube interviews, by the way. She said that she kept her Trump support secret in 2016 because she was afraid it would harm her in her modeling career, but now she came out. And of course, Fox News turns Elizabeth Pipko's solo adventure into Jewish millennials, in plural, launch Jexodus. She's an intelligent young woman, and she in an interview also said that she does not see much hope of convincing Jewish Democrats to leave the party. So she's as skeptical as probably we are in convincing hardcore Republicans to not believe in Trump. So whereas she's saying same thing, website, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and they don't really have a large following on Facebook. Now let's look at their talking points one by one. Let's speak about anti-Semitism first. So President Trump signed the most pro-Jewish declaration, the Declaration Against Anti-Semitism and Combating Anti-Semitism, which in and by itself is a very commendable action. Of course, those who claim that Trump is a great friend of the Jewish people invoke the fact that his daughter had converted and married, or rather married and converted to Judaism, and she has, and therefore Trump has lovely grandchildren who are Jews. If this is all that counts, I would like to mention that all three of Joe Biden's children had married Jewish people. So let's see to what extent is Trump really pro-Jewish and against anti-Semitism. You remember the instance where Trump challenged Jewish Americans to vote for Republicans because to do otherwise, Trump said, is either ignorant or disloyal. With that statement, he actually invoked an ancient anti-Semitic trope of dual loyalty. 19th century European nationalists who were opposed to Jewish emancipation declared that Jews, no matter where they live, they will be loyal to worldwide Jewry rather than the nations where they live. The best known or most widely known anti-Semitic trial of the 19th century was based on that charge of dual loyalty. That's when Alfred Dreyfus was prosecuted for treason in the French army. So these are dangerous words. The most comical, I think, declaration was when during the conference of the Israeli-American Council in 2019 in Florida, Trump declared to the public that a lot of you in the real estate are in the real estate business because I know you very well. You're brutal killers, not nice people at all, but you have to vote for me. You have no choice, he says. You're not going to vote for the wealth tax, I think referring to a point by Elizabeth Warren at the time. Yeah, let's take 100% of your wealth away. No, even if you don't like me, some of you don't, some of you I don't like at all actually, and you're going to be my biggest supporters because you'd be out of business in 15 minutes if you get it. That's consistent with his bullying and vulgar talk, but even the Jewish American Committee felt obliged to call him on that. And he said, they sent a tweet saying, "Dear POTUS, much as we appreciate your unwavering support of Israel, surely there must be a better way to appeal to American Jewish voters, as you did in Florida, than by money references that feed age-old and ugly stereotypes. Let's stay off that mine-infested road. In this way, Trump reminds me to anti-Semites that I met during my life, and both in Romania and Sweden and so on, who always tell you that, yeah, but some of my best friends are Jewish. So recently, of course, we know that Donald Trump, when visiting the Ford plant at Ypsilanti, Michigan, he lauded the so-called Ford bloodlines, very good bloodlines, he said, which of course were directed at the family of the probably most notorious anti-Semite in American history, which was Henry Ford. Here is an image of Henry Ford being decorated with the highest award for foreigners by Nazi Germany. And he's known, of course, for his fiercely anti-Semitic articles published in the Dearborn Independent. And also he was the first to publish and popularize the anti-Semitic tract called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. When you bought a new Ford, you got as a gift a volume of that anti-Semitic book. In addition, whenever neo-Nazis rallied, either in Charlottesville in 2017 or this year in Michigan, you always see the swastikas and so on. President Trump would say that there are fine people on both sides. He never was willing to condemn these people who, at least at Charlottesville, made overtly anti-Semitic speeches. They were chanting, Jews would not replace us, and so on and so forth. Recently, Trump congratulated a Georgia Republican candidate, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was an overt anti-Semite. She spreads anti-Semitic conspiracy theories by QAnon, and she also posed in photos with former KKK leader in Georgia, Chester Doles. You can find all this on whatever sources you choose and on the internet. So Deborah Lipstadt, a professor of Jewish history at Emory University, whom we had the pleasure of hearing this last February, speaking about her book, Anti-Semitism Here and Now. She looks at anti-Semitism on both ends of the spectrum, both left and right, but she highlights Trump's anti-Semitic remarks. As I said, very fine people remark at Charlottesville, distributing a caricature of Hillary Clinton that was during his campaign, where she was shown with the Star of David and a bunch of dollar bills in the background, saying she was the most corrupt candidate, but making the connection to Jewish love of money and so on. So Lipstadt says that Trump's white supremacists and anti-Semitic supporters heard all these things that he said during his campaign as a sort of endorsement. And this is why anti-Semitic incidents in the United States have grown to unprecedented numbers during Trump's presidency, and even starting with his campaign. These are some of the audits of ADL. And I would like to think that even pro-Trump Jewish people would not contest numbers given by ADL. But you can see here how 2017, 18, and 19 were all years where anti-Semitic incidents had grown tremendously. So if Deborah Lipstadt is right, that the neo-Nazis and the anti-Semites have taken Trump's anti-Semitic pronouncements as a tacit endorsement, then there is a direct link to the fact that these incidents have grown, not only in numbers, but also in gravity. The deadly attack on the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, the perpetrator who thought that Donald Trump was too soft, he blamed HIAS, the Jewish organization, for this was a time when Trump was threatening all of the United States with a caravan of illegal invasion or invasion of illegals coming from the South. And this man who killed 11 Jewish people in the synagogue, he posted earlier that he is blaming the Jews for allowing this invasion to take place. Likewise, the person who perpetrated the shooting at Poway Synagogue, the Chabad Synagogue in California, he also posted that he is defending the white race against Jewish encouraged invasion. Let's look now at the nuclear agreement with Iran, which was called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Trump had dismantled the agreement, as we know, calling it the worst agreement in Obama's presidency. But his assertion that Obama gave Iran the money is not really accurate, because in addition to the United States, the nuclear agreement included most of the European countries, also Russia and China. The deal lifted sanctions of frozen Iran assets. So what was given to Iran was basically access to their own money, which, by the way, was largely held in European banks, not American banks. So by unfreezing what belonged to Iran, this is what now the pro-Trump supporters claim that Obama had given this enormous amount of money. Now, was the nuclear agreement good or bad for Israel? Netanyahu, of course, used it as a whipping horse through all his speeches in the UN and elsewhere. But there were a great number of military and intelligence experts in Israel, and you see some of them listed here, who stated openly that the agreement is good for Israel and it should not be dismantled. You see below, you can go to this article on Google, but Israeli nuclear security experts on the deal. So scraping the agreement was not really good for Israel. It didn't slow down the Iranian nuclear development, it accelerated it. It made Iran more likely to attack Israel. Every time tensions between Iran and the US increases, Iran threatens with retaliations against Israel. Also because President Trump had managed to alienate most of European leaders, it's very unlikely that he could put together a coalition, diplomatic or even military, to stand up to the Iranians. Now, if for those who think that Iran, and you'll find that in every press that you look at, both right or left, that Iran threatens Israel whenever it is angered by the US, for those who think that these are empty threats, I would like to remind the fact that Saddam Hussein, during the Gulf War, in a war that Israel has, at the request of the United States, abstained, sat on the sidelines, not to upset the coalition, Saddam Hussein had lobbed in the region of 40 missiles to Israel. And those who do not believe that can turn to my sister, whom happily I also recognize in the audience because she was there at the receiving end of the missile. So threats to Israel are never empty threats. Now let's look at the annexation of the Golan Heights. In 1981, Israel passed the Golan Heights Law, which extended Israeli jurisdiction and administration to the area. This action was declared null and void immediately by the United Nations Security Council Resolution 497. Now, when President Trump in March 2019 had recognized the Golan Heights as sovereign Israeli territory, the United Nations again responded by saying the status of the Golan has not changed. The Israeli decision, though, to annex the Golan Heights received worldwide condemnation with European members and with the Security Council. Now, I'll be among the first to agree that the Golan Heights are of supreme and paramount security necessities for Israel, and Israel should never vacate. But also, I'm aware that declarations such as 1981 or 2019 are totally unnecessary. They will just stir up opposition when in fact the status quo is much more comfortable. And this is what most of the pundits say about Prime Minister Netanyahu's present designs on the West Bank. Nevertheless, Trump's declaration was applauded. And I want to just put in a little correction, because in addition to the United States recognizing the Golan Heights as sovereign Israeli territory, there was one more nation, and that is the Federated States of Micronesia. For those who were not familiar, here is their flag, here is their geographical location. So fear not, Israel will not be alone. The Federated States of Micronesia will come to help when help is needed. Truly, they don't have an army, but they have a little paramilitary maritime police. I don't know how long it would take to sail to Israel, but anyway. So Trump's decision was celebrated in Israel, so much so that Netanyahu had even declared a settlement there called Trump Heights. In spite of local protests, which say Trump Heights, but not here. And Trump Heights was never populated, and actually it fell in neglect, as you see here. Even the sign did not survive the storms and so on. I need to add here that it is not because Israel is not grateful to its benefactors. Actually, in 1950, there was a settlement called Kfar Truman, the Truman village, which is very nice and prospering. And they named it in recognition of the American president who recognized the state of Israel. So regarding annexations, I have two quotes from international legal experts and volumes of legal international law, which say that in present day, unilateral annexations are not legally admissible. And here I want to digress very briefly and look at a lesson in history. And I want to show that Israel in the past, even when it relied on much more serious US presidents than Donald Trump, and I'm referring to President Eisenhower, relied on guarantees and promises, it did not fare very well. And in 1956, there is the tripartite attack on Egypt by Great Britain, France, and Israel, where English and French paratroopers, this was in the wake of Nasser's nationalization of the Suez Canal, which did not sit well either with France or with England, and they dropped parachutists in the canal zone to take the canal back, and Israel was in agreement with these two powers, had actually launched an attack and occupied the entire Sinai Peninsula. The reason for Israel was not the Suez Canal, where they were never allowed to navigate freely like every other nation, but you see here at the bottom of the map, the blocking of the Straits of Tiran, which literally put a blockade on Israel's navigation through the Red Sea. This was a casus belli for Israel. So after Israel had managed to conquer the Sinai Peninsula and lift the blockade, President Eisenhower, who was infuriated not only by Israel, but also by France and England and their action, he insisted that all powers retreat, and he insisted that Israel should vacate the Sinai Peninsula. The only concession that Israel managed to get from Eisenhower when they pulled out from the Sinai was the establishment of the United Nations Emergency Force, which, as per Israel's request, had taken up positions in Gaza and Sharm el-Sheikh. Sharm el-Sheikh is the southern point of Sinai, in order to ensure that Israel will not be blockaded again, in Gaza in order to be a buffer between Egyptian military and Israeli, so that the Sinai was demilitarized, and therefore the threat of the Egyptian army was removed. This was in 1957, and President Eisenhower personally guaranteed these things to Prime Minister Ben-Gurion. This is November 1956, and 11 years later, we find ourselves in a situation where Israel again has to defend its right for free navigation. Nasser, being the leader of the Pan-Arabic world at the time, feeling very strong, he actually ordered the UN to move out of the Sinai. He moved his armies into the Sinai up to the Israeli border again, and once again he blockaded the Straits of Tiran. For 3 weeks, Prime Minister Eshkol at the time and Foreign Minister Abba Eban were pleading with the superpowers, showing that that they were promised and guaranteed these security measures, free navigation, and demilitarization, and they were told that this was then and this is now. So once again, Israel had to rely on its own strength, on its own army, to fight itself out of this impossible situation of an economic blockade. So actually, whenever I spoke to pro-Trump Israelis, Israeli Americans, I found that this little lesson in history helps because it concludes something that they cannot deny, that so far in Israel's history, whenever it came down to action, Israel could only count on its own strength, on the heroic dedication of the Israeli Defense Forces. So these symbolic actions actually have grave consequences on the ground. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, for example, which I list among the symbolic actions. Previous administrations would not make that move because they thought it's wiser to play that card when a comprehensive negotiation is on the table. The hope that Trump's gesture would be followed by other nations did not materialize. And even when Israel offered financial benefits to countries to move their embassy to Jerusalem, there was no response. You see here that Foreign Minister Israel Katz proposed to give an aid package of $14.2 million to any country that would move its embassy to Jerusalem, and this is published by Israel Hayom, which is a pro-Trump paper, by the way. So these were basically theatrics meant to endear Trump to both Israelis and evangelists, American evangelists. But the only result, this is Trump signing the act, the only result was actually a lot of unrest and lethal confrontations in the ground. So it was again paid for in blood. Again, just as a side point, I should say that before 1967, there were many countries that had their embassies in Jerusalem, embassies to Israel. Most of them moved to Tel Aviv after the '67 war. And Chile and the Netherlands actually kept their embassies in Jerusalem until 1981, when Israel proclaimed the Jerusalem Law, basically annexing Jerusalem. Another symbolic action with grave consequences was when President Trump ordered the American forces out of Syria, which even Prime Minister Netanyahu conceded that it created big problems for Israel. Because it practically allowed Russia to be the only superpower with a military presence in the area. And even now, the IDF has to coordinate its movements with the Russian military, which is not a good situation for Israel. And also it cleared the way for a Turkish incursion against the Kurdish forces, or America's top allies in the battle against the Islamic State, but also important allies of Israel. Another move that is being talked about in recent months is the removal of the American contingent from the multinational force of observers in the Sinai. It really has no significance for the American troops overseas. It cannot be considered a significant troop reduction. But America wants to, as I say, is considering removing its contingent from the MFO. When I was a liaison officer to the UN, I served actually with the MFO, but I was not the most important person there. The most important person is, what did I do? Sorry, I got a little emotional when I speak of my youth. Oh, what the hell?
Okay. Okay, go back.
Yeah, the most important person, forgive my trembling hands, is actually the current chairman of the Chiefs of Staff in America, General Mark Milley, who was in the news, unfortunately, recently, and he was a force commander in the MFO in one of his deployments. Now, cutting the aid to the Palestinians. The thinking behind this move seemed to be an act to force the Palestinians to the negotiating table. As most things with Palestinians, of course, it didn't work. It made them more stubborn. And actually, it forced Abbas to make accommodations with Hamas. The void left by the US financially in the aid to the Palestinians was quickly filled by Iran and Oman, not friends of Israel. These largely symbolic gestures, as I said, have grave consequences on the ground. On one hand, they discourage the moderates, both on the Israeli and the Arab side of the conflict. They embolden the extremists for whom peace is not the first priority. And it also compromises America's image as an honest broker in the Middle East conflict. If you follow the news in recent months, Russia is already stepping in to play the broker in this conflict and had called for a conference of Palestinians in Russia. Also, by disqualifying and being so unilaterally in his support of Netanyahu and Israel. Once again, Trump is playing to the anti-Semitic trope that Jews control the US. You remember this caricature, and that they control the world, in fact. The proposed annexation of the West Bank. It was condemned by the United Nations, among others, by most European powers. It caused a lot of anti-Israeli protests and anti-American protests. And in fact, if you look at the press, almost in its entirety, they're condemning this move, which many advocates of Israel are puzzled why, after 14 years of slowly building an important and concrete Israeli Jewish presence in the West Bank, why do they now need to rock the boat when the status quo is actually rather favorable to Israel? And why do they now need to stir up this issue, which will have consequences only to the detriment of Israel? Jordan might cancel their peace deal. Russia, the UN, the Vatican condemned this plan. Most Jews in the diaspora are worried about it. And in Israel, at least half of Israelis are against it. So Trump encouraging this move does not mean that he is really our best friend. When, and this is another point that Jews for Trump hold against the Democrats, is what they call the parting shot of President Obama against Israel. On December 23, 2016, the United States had abstained from voting and vetoing a resolution in the Security Council. And with hindsight, it seems that that was not such an unfriendly gesture, because some friends will stop us from self-destruction. So is Trump really a friend of Israel or a friend of Bibi? The press already called this bromance Trump and now. Actually, it was the Jerusalem Post who called it that. And you see here how both Netanyahu used this friendship to help him in his electoral campaigns. And then Netanyahu's gratitude was used by Trump in his electoral campaigns. Israelis are familiar with these enormous posters during the election campaign where Netanyahu flaunts the support of Trump. But this friendship has costs. For example, recently Israel had to renounce, to cancel a $1.5 billion contract with China on desalinization because it was not allowed to accept it by the US administration. Mr. Pompeo had traveled to Israel specifically to nix this agreement. Not all of Trump's costly mistakes, costly to Israel, were made out of malice. Some are made out of sheer stupidity. For example, when he shared secret intelligence with the Russians in the Oval Office meeting, he actually revealed a Mossad and Israeli commando action which managed to hack ISIS computers and thwart a plan to plant bombs in computers and so on. So by sharing this secret with the Russians, he actually burned a Israeli source in ISIS. Now, some Jewish Americans and Israeli Americans will say they'll vote for Trump, not for the love of Trump, but for fear of the Democrats. Here again, I want to show that historically, the best things for Israel happened during Democrat presidencies. I mentioned Obama's large military aid package. The Jordanian peace treaty was signed under President Clinton, and the Egypt peace treaty under President Carter. It's only since that Egyptian peace treaty that Israel can now sail freely, not only through the Straits of Tiran, but even through the Suez Canal. So then let's look at the Democrat candidate. And is he really dangerous to Israel? Is he really an anti-Semite? Here are some of the statements that Biden had published regarding Jewish interests and Israeli interests. And I think from Biden's past, one can assume that he will be a supporter of the state of Israel. He likes to often recount the meeting he had after the Yom Kippur War with Prime Minister Golda Meir, which moved him very much. Apparently, Golda Meir was aware of his distress when she showed him the Israeli casualties. So in order to comfort him, she leaned over and she said, "Don't worry, Senator Biden, we have a secret weapon." And when he said, "What?" He said, "We have nowhere else to go." And Biden kept that in mind. So I mentioned regarding the family ties, but it's not a competition between whose children married Jews. What I think more pertinent, and with this I will end, is what did they learn at their father's knees? And here is Joe Biden Sr. And Joe Biden says that he was 6 years old when Israel became a state, and he remembers his father saying that he couldn't understand how people didn't want to recognize, some people didn't want to recognize the state of Israel, and that stayed with him. That's also when he learned the phrase "never again." Another interesting thing that his father said was that Israel can only count on itself when it comes to real crisis. Whereas Frederick Trump, Donald Trump's father, was arrested in 1927 at a KKK client. I mean, he's a known racist. There were civil rights suit charges filed against him. Woody Guthrie wrote a song about his racism. And in addition to the fact that he also colored his hair red, but they pretended up to the 1980s that they were Swedes because Fred Trump was afraid that his German ancestry might hurt his business. So Donald Trump, I guess, had a good teacher about how to mask the truth. Thank you. I can't hear anybody. That's okay. One lone applause is very, very encouraging. Thank you. That's why I love in-person meetings more. Maybe you're not applauding. Okay, go ahead. Can you get out?
I'll applaud.
Thumbs up.
Okay.
Yes, we can do that.
So are you taking questions? Andre,
Yes,
are you taking questions?
of course.
Well, he needs to ask the questions of Jerry.
What do
Yeah,
you mean?
Jerry, we can't hear
I
you.
can't hear you.
Jerry, we can't hear you.
Okay, Andre, thank you very, very much.
Yes.
It was very informative, and I want to let everyone know that we will be sending out a summary. We'll be sending out a summary of the important points by email to everyone who's attending. If you have a question, put it into the chat, and then we will recognize you. Okay? Norm Olshansky has a question. Norm, do you want to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask that question?
Working.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Andre, terrific presentation. My question is that over the entire history of Israel, the Palestinians have had one negotiating point, and that is the pre-67 borders. And for Hamas and many of the other Palestinians, the complete elimination of the state of Israel. So my question is, given that they've been offered 90% of that and several other times been offered things, what else could be done other than the shock of potential annexation to get them back to the table?
Well, I want to just make a caveat. First of all, I live in America since 1984, so I don't presume the right to speak for Israel or Israelis, but I consider myself informed and a student of history. So in my opinion, and in the opinion of many that I've read, allowing the status quo to be as it is for the time being would have been the best strategy. It is a position of strength for Israel. And perhaps there would have been other more compelling reasons for the Palestinians to come to the negotiating table. I recently read in the Israeli paper Times of Israel, which I consider unbiased in reporting, that they were speculating on what is Prime Minister Netanyahu's agenda behind this move. I mean, even the Trump administration is ambivalent for the moment about the annexation. They did not come out in favor of it. The entire world is threatening Israel with sanctions if this move is made unilaterally. And some actually speculate, and it does sound very, very cynical, but since it's in the paper, it's public domain, so I'm not hesitant to share it. Some people think that it's a move by Netanyahu, which will not take place, but it might allow him, because his allies in the government now, Benny Gantz and Ashkenazi and others, would veto it, would not go along with it. It might allow him to call for a second election, for another election rather, in which he is clearly the projected winner. So it could very well be that this is not a move in order to force the Palestinians to then negotiate, but a move for internal Israeli politics. You can read that in today's Israel or Times of Israel. So I think not allowing the connections with some Arab states like Saudi and Qatar and so on, not Qatar, the United Emirates, were pro-Israeli for a while now, simply recognizing the reality of the necessity of Israel, allowing them perhaps to be able to make diplomatic moves and so on would have been more productive. But I agree with you. Even the Oslo Accords had offered a lot more to the Palestinians than the present Trump peace plan. And Palestinians have never failed to sabotage their own interests. So yeah, it is difficult. But it's proven that force has not worked in bringing Arabs to be reasonable. After they lost in '67, and most of Israel, I was in Israel at the time, and I remember talking with people and so on. Nobody in Israel, I don't think, believed that Israel will stay and govern those newly conquered territories. I think the overwhelming feeling in Israel was that this will lead to a comprehensive peace. What followed was the Khartoum conference, in which the Arab states declared no, 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 no to negotiations, no to peace, no to so on. And then came the Yom Kippur War. The Yom Kippur War, as it ended, because of Henry Kissinger's manipulation of the ceasefire, allowed the Egyptians to have a little sense of victory, which then led to the peace with Anwar Sadat. So I think history shows that Arabs are more amenable to come to the negotiating table when their dignity is not trashed.
Okay, we've got another question from Barbara Peltz. Barbara, if you would unmute yourself and then state your question.
Hi, Andre, thank you very, very much. Very, very informative. We really appreciate it. Andre, what do you think these Trumpers, the Jewets, have to gain by fabricating the lies that they do in order to make their points? I mean, what's their motivation?
The exit?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
It is simply this. They are hoping to convince some of us that Trump is really the best friend Israel has got in the White House. And that, by the way, is a phrase coined by Benjamin Netanyahu, who was a Republican sympathizer for 35 years, way back when he was ambassador at the UN in New York. So much so that in one interview, Benjamin Netanyahu said, "I speak Republican." So I think that the goal is to convince as many Israeli Americans, Jewish Americans, that if we value the security of Israel, then and the fight on anti-Semitism, then we need to vote for President Trump in November. And of course, the extremist statements of the squad has given these people wind under their wings, because there indeed are very fiercely anti-Israeli, anti-Semitic, but I do hope they're in a minority, and that we have more to gain than to fear from a democratic president. I should say here that, again, according to the press, the biggest damage that Trump did for American Jewry in Israel is that before Trump's presidency, support for Israel was bipartisan in America. Now it became a very partisan issue.
Okay, I don't see any other questions coming. Andre, thank you very much. Please beware, everyone, that, one of the things we wanted to accomplish by this is give people knowledge and talking points when trying to discuss this with Republican Jews. I must also say that there are many Republican Jews that are really not open to hearing anything that we would have to say, in which case I think it's not worth our time and energy and effort to try to talk with them. Sorry, it's just not worth it. But hopefully this presentation is giving you more information and talking points that you could use. There's another comment from Mark Weiner. Mark, you want to go ahead? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I really appreciate it. Andre, really a wonderful presentation. When I met you in Sarasota at the formative meeting of the caucus, I never imagined you were so fantastic. Really great job. I would love to put your stuff up on our state website. So if you can send me that stuff, we'll find the way to put it up, as much of your presentation as possible. I just want to add a few things about general background and what we're fighting to do. Every vote counts. I don't have to tell all of you that. We are in the ultimate swing state, and we expect that it's going to be close. And any illusions that we have, we got to be careful about. We should remind ourselves of what happened in 2016 and put up in front of us the nightmare that we wake up on November 4th and find that Donald Trump has been reelected president, and that we didn't do everything that we could possibly do to prevent that. I want to put this into some context and frame what we're trying to do. In 2016, Florida exactly replicated the Jewish vote in the United States as a whole. Hillary Clinton got 70% of the Jewish vote, both nationally and in Florida. Donald Trump got 25%, Jill Stein got 3%, and Gary Johnson got 2%. In the 2018 election for Congress, fully 80% of American Jews voted for Democratic candidates for Congress. That's very much in keeping with the national trend. 70% was low, 80% is more normal for Jews. We should shoot to get that 80% again for Florida Jews. And we're going to have to do that by exactly the kind of presentations that Andre gave and our talking one-on-one with various people. We have to understand that a certain percentage of Jews are simply not going to be with us because their concept of Jewish identity is different from ours. They have a sense of Jewish identity, and this is something which is also in Israel very much, which is more akin to the white nationalists and their view of their identity. The Jews who support Trump have a kind of a Jewish nationalistic view where they don't celebrate America the way we do as a land of a pluribus unum, of the plurality of groups which enrich our lives as Americans. So that's the range. We're looking just to increase the Jewish vote from 70 to 80%. I think we have an excellent shot at doing it. I think the Jews, more than anybody else, realize the way that Donald Trump, despite his expressions of affection for Israel, despite his embrace of Jews, most of all his Jewish princess daughter, that the truth of the matter is he creates the kind of environment and sows the land with the kind of, or he fertilizes the land in such a way with hatred and bitterness and division, which breeds anti-Semitism and threatens the future of Jews in American society. His alliance with fundamentalist Christian evangelicals further expands this because despite their love for Israel and devotion to building the Jewish state and defending everything Israel, their vision of America is a Christian America, which really does not have the place in it for Jews the way we have experienced American history. So I think, you know, as brief as I can be, that should put our frame. All we're trying to do is raise the 70% to 80%, and I have every confidence we're going to be able to do it. But it's trench warfare, just like we go after every single voter to get them to vote for Joe Biden. We go after every Jew to make America good again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Can I add one word
Barry,
there, by
can
the
I-
way, before we go? This is Joe Geller.
Yes, Joe, go ahead. And then I've got just a couple quick comments and then we are going to adjourn. Go ahead.
By the way, you can let me in on the Zoom if you get the chance. I've been trying to get on. But
Oh, okay.
let me just say about the comment that you made. There. Okay. Hi. So, quote using. Okay. I think this is better. So let me just say, in reference to the comment that you just made about.
Wait a minute. Joe, hold on just a second. Would everyone mute themselves except Joe? Because we're getting some feedback and it's interfering with his being able to talk. Okay? Thank you. Go ahead, Joe. Joe?
Okay. How's this? Better?
Good.
Okay. So I agree with you that a lot of these Trumpy Republicans that are Jewish are just, there's just no reasoning with them. And you're right that a big expenditure of time trying to convert people like Dr. Krauss went through in that, by the way, amazing presentation, which I also want a copy of the slideshow. We need to circulate this far and wide. The information on Jexodus and Jexit alone and who those people are is absolutely priceless. But the target is really, just so we're clear, yes, we're not going to convert those hardcore people that say they left the Democratic Party, as Dr. Krauss says, but really have been trumped out Republicans all along. We're not going to convert Sheldon Adelson. But there are an awful lot of Jews who are buying into some of this outrageous propaganda. There are an awful lot of Jews who are falling for this, who really think that Trump has been a friend to Israel because he's made these empty gestures like supporting the move of the embassy, as Dr. Krauss went through. I mean, great presentation. But or saying that, oh, we have a peace plan that is completely one-sided, not going to go anywhere, completely from Netanyahu's point of view. People are buying into it, and not hardcore Republicans. So to move from 75 to 80%, like Dr. Weiner said, we have to be outspoken in talking to any Jew in the state of Florida who's likely to vote, and just ration it a little bit. If you see that they're completely, absolutely closed-minded, save your ammo. But for all those people in between that are falling for their propaganda, we need to be extremely engaged with the facts. We need to let them know some of what we've just heard, some of what we know, some of the things that Ben Martell has on his website. And we have to be over the top, frankly, in talking to these people, because that's the only way we're going to get the message across. So anyway, thank you for allowing me to listen in.
Thank you, Joe, very much. You know, it also reminds me in terms of Trump's empty gestures, one of the biggest ones was his charitable foundation that literally gave no money to anyone except him. You know, that is his mode of operation, period.
Jerry,
Okay,
is it possible to ask a question?
just put it in the chat.
I did way back and you ignored me.
It was, I'm sorry, but your comment was about, you know, why not vote for Trump when this whole presentation is about that? And
No, it's about why vote for Biden.
okay, well,
The alternative to Trump is absolutely lousy.
okay, well, we certainly disagree with you, but we have plenty there's plenty.
Let's talk about it.
There's plenty of information available, and we don't have time now to do it.
Okay.
No, and by the way, look, people aren't just voting for Joe Biden. They're voting for a change to be made in the country that is so necessary. It's beyond. Okay.
Okay, but
Andre.
Trump is a jerk, but
Andre.
Brings back the Obama administration. Thank you, Andre.
Andre, unmute yourself there. Do you want to respond to that? Do you want to respond to that?
Do you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I want to respond to the previous discussion about who is convincing whom and how. So,
Please write in the chat and
you know, when you said that one should not waste one's time with hardcore.
And running the meeting.
Jerry.
I'm sorry. What were you saying?
When you said that one should not waste one's time with hardcore, unconvincible people.
Right.
And this gentleman that came on said that that we need to convince and so on and so forth. So this just reminds me of a lovely Hasidic tale that Elie Wiesel used to say about a righteous Jew who comes to a town where most of the Jewish community is really evil and corrupt and so on. And every day he goes to the marketplace and preaches for the people to be better. And 10 years go by and he hadn't convinced anyone. And somebody comes up to him and he says, can't you see 10 years you haven't converted anyone to your righteous way of thinking? So then why do you keep preaching and screaming? So the answer of the Hasid was, in the beginning, I was screaming and preaching in order to convince them. Now I'm screaming and preaching so they can convince me.
Very good. Thank you so much. Again, we're going to be sending out a summary sheet with talking points about this lecture, and we very much appreciate your participation today. Please check our website, srqjewishdem's.org. There's a lot of information there, and membership applications. We invite you to join us and support us. Thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you all again, in the not too distant future. Thank you.
I guess that's it.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Register to vote by mail.
Yeah, vote by mail is right.